Hi again, welcome back to China Manufacturing Decoded. It's Adrian from the team. I'm back after a couple of weeks out when Renaud has had some really great guests on. Renaud is still joining me though. Hi, Renaud.
Hey, hi, Adrian.
Hi. Yeah, good to be back on the pod. But some great guests, Andrew Hupert a couple of weeks ago, and then talking about kind of like the changing of the guard, I suppose, and a new reality for especially American importers.
Oh yeah, or anybody who sells on the U.S. market.
Yeah,
So that's scary.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, yes.
And Belinda Jacobs last week, and you guys had a really interesting discussion about how to develop new soft goods, which is something that we haven't really covered before.
Right. Yeah, garments and how to document the quality standard for garments. And there's a very sort of standardized way to do it with tech packs. A lot of English-speaking countries call it a tech pack, and we kind of explain the main activities and the main milestones in the development of a new style.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So if you're listening and you didn't catch those special guests, go back to the last couple of episodes. That's episodes 106 and 107. Today, we're actually diving back into a series of episodes that we've been doing on how to handle your own sourcing from China. And that's been everything from just finding the suppliers that you need at the very beginning of the process through to getting your products manufactured, and then actions that you do after you started working with the supplier, mainly soft skills, I suppose, like building rapport with the supplier in order to have a good relationship moving forward. And today's topic, which is improving the product quality that you're actually getting from your current supplier. So this is part 8 of the series. If you want to go back and listen to every part before this, the links are, as ever, in the show notes. So improving your supplier's quality. First question, Renaud. Are product defects then impossible to avoid?
Let's say that having zero defect over, 1 million products made consecutively in the same manufacturing place is extremely rare. I've read about, 1 or 2 companies that achieved that, but it just means that no defect was caught, right? It was detected. It doesn't mean that they did not exist at the time of, at the end of the line, let's say. But it's exceedingly rare to read about anything like that. Now, that's in the auto industry or in very specific sectors. But when we look at consumer goods in general, especially relatively cheap consumer goods made in Asia, like in low-cost Asia, in China, in Vietnam, in Bangladesh, in India, in Pakistan, and so on. If you talk about that with a supplier, then they will say, what are you even talking about? Defects are always there. It comes with the territory. You do production, there's going to be variation, and we cannot do much about it. And we're going to, and when you hear that, and you buy, a batch of 5,000 T-shirts or some Bluetooth speakers or something, maybe all you want is to keep the defect rate at 1% or 2%, and maybe you're happy about that, right? It really depends on your market. It depends on how expensive the failures are and so on. Now, if you're making airbags that go into cars, hundreds of a percent is very bad, okay? So, because it's related to product safety, and and there are regulations about it, and so on. Or if you make brake systems for cars, hundreds of a percent is not going to cut it, right? So It really depends on where you are in the supply chain, what industry you're in. But when suppliers look at me in the eye and say, come on, nobody's under 1% of defectives, and like, well, with your mindset and your lack of awareness, yeah, you're not going to get under 1%. I can see that, but that's your problem, right? Anyway, it can be a bit frustrating with how they can tell you these kind of things with a straight face and really believe it.
Yeah, I mean, you did mention an interesting word there, though, low cost Asia, and I suppose it sort of almost goes with the territory, doesn't it?
Oh, to a certain extent, yes. If the buyer goes for low price and doesn't give much weight to other criteria, they're gonna get a low price and maybe not very good performance on other criteria such as safety, quality, reliability. Yeah.
Okay, so let's assume that we are interested in reducing defects or improving overall quality of products. Of course, is a noble goal, and I'm sure most importers would want that. So we start to move towards zero defects. Zero defects in reality may not be realistically possible, but the action of trying to get towards that goal, that's going to bring up overall quality, right? So I suppose we've got a strategy in place to get to zero defects in inverted commas, and you've got some different pieces of advice that will help move towards better quality. And most of them, my understanding is, they don't require much or any capital investment even.
Right. And we're going to cover a few of these important topics that have an impact on product quality. And here I'm going to focus mostly on quality at the end of the line. We also talked about product reliability and durability in previous podcasts. That's sort of another topic. Obviously, poor quality will also trigger poor reliability, right? But we're just going to focus as a snapshot during production or at end of production, how to move the proportion of defective goods or components down, right? So,
great.
The first thing is the suppliers get to get a message. They got to have something that motivates them. Otherwise, why would they change? All right, especially in China, most suppliers are very passive. Once they have a team doing certain processes and they see that the product sells, why would they make any changes, right? Why would they invest any management bandwidth into driving change? They have to feel the cost of poor quality. And again, we talked about that in a previous episode of the podcast, several of them actually, with Clive and Max. And if the supplier doesn't feel the heat, they don't see that there's returns and complaints and so on, and very high chargebacks and penalties and so on from the supply chain. Well, why care? If they have 2% of defective goods and they are checked in very typical acceptance testing sort of inspections with an AQL of 2.5, well, pretty much all the time they will pass. And who's going to get these 2% of defective goods? At some point down the road, maybe the products will not be sold. They will stay in the store, or they will be sent back or something, and it's just built into the cost model downstream, and it doesn't go back to the manufacturer. Well, the manufacturer is pretty happy about that, right? They don't want to change anything, so you got to send them the feedback as well as the chargeback, and that's when they might be disposed to thinking, actually, okay, we got to do something. So that's the very first, it's like the foundation. If you don't have that usually nothing's going to happen. Now,
Yeah.
let's go into what can move the needle, how to get closer to zero defect in a significant manner. Now, I'm going to cover a few different topics, and obviously talking in general, right? Not looking at one specific manufacturer, not doing a gap analysis. No, I'm just talking in general here. So there's different recipes that usually kind of build on top of each other and complement each other and go in the same direction. And obviously, you have to decide which ones to do in priority and in where to put more emphasis, right? Because different factories are in different situations. But the first one that I'm going to cover is beware of batch and queue. So a lot of manufacturers, and this is all over the world, when they don't know about best practices, about lean manufacturing, etc., what they tend to do is they tend to think, okay, the bigger the batch, the lower the unit cost, because we don't have many setup costs and wasted time changing things, and we don't have to think too much also. And the operators on the line, they get more effective, and faster, more efficient, I should say, over time and so on. And it's easier to manage. So they have an order of 10,000 pieces. They hope they get an order for 30,000 pieces. Once they get an order for 30,000, they hope they get an order for 100,000 pieces. And they think that's the way they drive their costs down, and they keep their business simple, which they love. And the problem is making one big batch of 30,000 pieces actually is very dangerous in the way they do it, because let's say, I don't know, got to take an example. Maybe I remember a factory of electrical fans in Zhongshan that I went to 5 or 6 years ago. Big place, huge facility, millions and millions of dollars of inventory. And you were walking across, and they were getting a bunch of parts, and they were, some of them were cast outside, and some of them were they were stamping the parts, etc., etc. And just looking at stamping, so stamping is fast, dong, 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 dong. And they were building so much inventory before it all goes into assembly. We counted, and they had an excess of stamped parts that would take something like 3 weeks to consume by assembly, right? So assembly was a bottleneck. So you had like 3 weeks of stamped parts. Now, what happens if the stamping tool has got some kind of problem, and it was not properly maintained, and maybe it was not replaced on time, and suddenly you have 20,000 parts that have some kind of quality problem, and you find out about it maybe at the end of assembly. So by the time you find it, maybe you get 2,000 full product assembled, right? So that's why it's extremely dangerous to let a manufacturer go with very large batches like that, because they love, it's so easy. You just, get the stamping machine going, tell the operator you just do this, and don't think, and the supervisor doesn't have to think. Nobody has to think much, and it's like it looks very smooth to them, but they're building a lot of inventory that might come with a lot of defects. So ideally, you try to reduce all of that work in process inventory. You try to link the processes much more tightly so that they don't do a lot more in advance. And of course, it's going to cost some more changeovers and so on. However, it's going to reduce sort of that risk. Is going to compress the lead times, and these very widespread quality issues, well, they're going to be caught much, much earlier. Okay, so that's one thing, a big thing, right? If we look not at the whole series of processes, in this case, the stamping and some welding and then going into assembly and packing. Now, if we just look at an assembly line, it's the same idea. They like to to let a lot of material go through the line. And then you look at one workstation, one operator, they have a bunch of different things in front of them. Well, it's so easy to forget which one you processed, And same thing with the test is even worse. When they test, if it's not one piece by one piece, they have 10 pieces or 20 pieces in front of them. It's so easy to double test one and forget to test the other one, right? And that, in many cases, is responsible for maybe a 1% defect rate, just that, right? Or a 2% defect rate. So it's very important to rethink the organization. And then you have to fight, of course, with the production manager and so on. So that might not be the first thing you do, but that might be the one thing that has the biggest impact. Okay. Second one is local management and discipline. Okay, not discipline in the sense that you fire someone or you punish someone harshly when they make a mistake. No, because mistakes happen because of poor processes and poor management. Okay, Mistakes are a reflection of a bad system, not of the person making the mistake. Well, except in some cases, but in most cases it's not. So when I go to a factory and then I see, there's a lot of signs of bad, or I would say missing management. People don't wear the protective equipment. Things are sloppy, everywhere. There's a little bit of sloppiness everywhere. Well, that carries over to product quality. There's no question. When something is not really right, well, people would just close their eyes and let it go, right? So having, ideally they would then involve the operators and the local leaders and so on in defining the way to work and getting them to confirm it's fine and maybe sometimes to show that there's a problem and so on. That's culture, right? In most cases, you're not going to have that for a long time or ever in a Chinese factory. A typical one where you have the migrant workers coming and just doing the job, and I don't give a crap. And if this company falls down, I find another job across the street. With this kind of people, with that kind of culture, not going to work. The more you try to involve them and involve the local leaders, the better. The more they will adhere to the standards. Okay, so you have to first define the standards, define the work instructions. Then you have to make sure people really understand them and agree with them and sort of commit to following them, right? And you need to have the daily management routines of the local leaders going around and checking if there's any deviation from the standard. You need to make things as visible as possible so that they can manage to it and notice when there's a problem and make it sort of obvious so there's pressure to do something about it. Okay, when you see managers staying in their office, it's South China, it's June, it's pretty hot, I don't want to get down to the shop floor, right? Well, they better get down to the shop floor and observe, because if they don't come down, then the level under doesn't have much pressure. And then if the level under doesn't have any pressure, then the level even more under has even less pressure. And then you have this wool, whatever sort of attitude. Who cares? Let's just push the products out the door and who cares? And that's really what you want to avoid, right? So it comes from, it's really about management. What we see, the quality issues that we see are mostly a failure of management. And obviously, if there's no quality system that has been developed and tailor-made to the needs of that specific factory, you can see it right away. So that's a very big one. If you don't get the managers to understand their role and to start to have a routine, starting in the morning, looking at this and then looking at that, and putting some information up on the walls or on whiteboards to make things obvious and to track what is the standard and where are we, versus standard. It's going to be a mess, and not just for quality. When I talk about standards, it's also the standard times for the operations. It's the number of products that are made in the day. If they don't pay attention to that, well, end of the day, they might rush stuff out just to get to their number of whatever, 1,200 pieces by the end of the shift.
That makes everything even worse.
Yeah, of course. And then that has a carryover effect on quality, of course. So that's the second point, really. Management. If you have poor management, if people don't understand all that and don't have the discipline to do it, well, things are going to be sloppy, and then sloppiness is definitely going to lead to quality issues and safety issues and all kinds of troubles.
Yeah.
Then number 3 is about getting the operators, or at least some of the operators, to do some of the quality control work. You can't just rely on inspectors. So the very unsophisticated and immature approach is to have, purchasing and the suppliers negotiate their things and their deals and the price and so on, and then to have incoming QC inspectors sort of be the police trying to find the problems. And then same thing, to have production make stuff, and then to have inspectors, trying to find the criminals, the defectives somewhere, and then to push it back to production and say, oh, you messed up, you have to rework, etc. This cannot lead you to have a good quality, basically. You will always have issues. You will avoid maybe the biggest issues, but you're really going to hit the ceiling, and you have to change that. And a way to change that, and also at the same time of saving money, really, is to train some of the operators to carry out some of the quality checkpoints, right? Because when you look at them, they might not be very busy 100% of the time, so they might have a little bit of extra time that they can put to use to do a little bit of inspection. And ideally, they would check before they process the part, right? Because then they check the what the operator before them has done. This is successive inspection. Now, they can also inspect after they have done the processing, but then they lose a little bit of objectivity, right? So in some cases, we've found that this is really it's just not happening. They say, well, why do I inspect? I know I've done it well anyway, right? And then it's very tempting to just slack off a bit and not do it. So it's this whole idea of involving operators to do some of the quality control work. And ideally, again, this is a culture thing, but if you can get them to understand that it's not in their interest to make poor quality products, then a lot of things will change. And what we see in a lot of Chinese factories, and also this is very, very hard to change, is a very bad pay scheme, by the piece. They pay by the piece. And of course, they also have to promise a minimum salary per month, otherwise people are not going to come. But the clear incentive is make more pieces, get paid more. And if somebody catches some problems, then you have to fix them. You have to rework them, and it's going to take you some time, and you're not going to get paid for that, right? So the whole idea is I go as fast as I can to produce as many pieces as I can, and I try to make sure these nasty inspectors are not going to catch it. And then, of course, when the inspectors come back and say, hey, there's a problem here, then everybody in production will be like, wow, this is fine. This is not a problem. Come on, you're really pesky. You're just trying to make our life hard. Come on, da da da. And the poor inspector is going to feel a lot of pressure, and the good ones go. And the ones who don't really care, they stay. And then you just let your checks and balances basically get destroyed. and nobody's really paying much attention to production anymore, right? So again, it's related to management, of course, but that's the idea of making sure that production people bear some of the responsibility for quality, that they do not see it as something external to them that will impact them poorly, if they get caught. No, it's more like if they do bad quality anyway, it's going to be caught, and it's better to catch it early, and let's do everything right, and then we'll all make, we'll make more money. If you can set up the system that way, these incentives, then it's much, much better.
And empowering for the staff, I'm sure. I mean, okay, we've got cultural aspects, and we're not talking about Western countries here, but nonetheless, I think if you're empowering the staff to take more responsibility and more pride in their work, perhaps that's never going to be a bad thing, is it?
It cannot be a bad thing, right? And it very much depends on the workforce you have, how far you can go. But hopefully the local leaders and the supervisors and the production manager get it. And if these people get it and support it, it's going to have an impact.
Okay, great. And number 4?
Right. So we were talking about manual work because, again, when I talk to especially Chinese suppliers, they always say, well, this is done by hand. There's always going to be defects. Come on, right? Cannot be perfect. It doesn't come out of a machine. And I'm like, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. If you had a good process engineer, most of these human mistakes could actually be avoided, could be made impossible even, right? So it's the whole concept of mistake proofing. And a very simple example is when you do drilling. So the drilling is in a lot of different products, a lot of furniture products, for example, there's drilling, and wooden products in general, etc. There's a lot of drilling operations, and then what happens, a very common mistake when you drill a part, is you put it upside down or you put it in the wrong orientation, and it's going to go against the side of the fixture and pop, or two sides. Usually they put it again, two sides, and then they drill. And if it's not placed correctly, well, the hole is going to be in the wrong place. And there's a very common mistake proofing countermeasure to that, which is putting some pins on the fixture so that it's actually impossible to put the part the wrong way. And in some cases, they had to redesign the part a little bit to make it possible to have pins that enforce really the way the part is placed. This is the same idea as when you insert a SIM card into your phone. You don't think for a while, is this disorientation or that one? No, it's kind of obvious. And if you try to put it the wrong way, you're going to be blocked because there's a little notch that allows you to push it entirely. So it's really this idea. That's a mistake-proofing device. And when you have process engineers thinking through that and talking to the product designers, a lot of mistake-proofing is possible, right? So what you do is you start from the common mistakes if production is already running, and you think, okay, why did it happen? Why did it happen? You observe the operations, and then when you have a few common issues like that, then you need to be a little bit creative and you need to try and come up with a permanent fix. Now, a good mistake-proofing device will totally prevent the mistake. It's impossible. Or, one level down, it will still make it possible, but it will detect the problem. So at least you don't pass it to the next stage, right? And there's several levels of that, right? Or maybe you can simple things like checklists, make sure that you do this and you do this and you check that systematically, getting back to giving some of the quality control work to operators. It's better than nothing. It's not very powerful, but it's better than nothing. Again, getting back to the product design, color coding some of the components. Like when you get a new computer, for example, you're going to see that some of the ports are green, some are blue, and then you look at the cable side, the male side, some of them are going to be green, some of them are going to be blue. Okay, green is going to go with green, blue is going to go with blue. You don't have to think too much, right? Just same thing. Sometimes in production you see these kinds of things, and it's a good usability engineering, they call it usually. It's a good approach. It's a very good approach. And the beauty of it is a good mistake-proofing device does not add any work. And that's really important because it's going to happen. They're going to be in a rush. They've got to get the goods loaded in the container by midnight tonight. And, and they still have X thousands of pieces to make. And anything that adds a little bit of time is going to be pushed aside, and no representative of the customer is present, and the manager is out of town, right? That's gonna happen. You have to plan for it. So if your mistake-proofing device or your system does not actually make things slower or more cumbersome, they're not even going to try to bypass it, and that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it, right? And it costs nothing, right? Which is a big thing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Right. Point number 5. I talked before about documenting the standards, preparing some work instructions, and then training people to it, and that's a big topic. So we often go to factories and they have some kind of instructions up there, usually black and white. You're lucky if you have one photo, and if you have step 1, step 2, step 3, and nobody looks at them. And then you look at the operation and you look at it and you're like, wait a minute, this is not what they're doing, because this stuff was prepared 1 year ago or 6 months ago, and nobody's really trying to keep it updated, and it's decoration, right? It looks good when there's a customer walking by pretty fast, doesn't stop to really try to understand what's going on, kind of read Chinese, kind of looks good. Yeah, you see, we train the workers and we define things. You see, we have manufacturing engineers, they've done this, but when you look at it closely, you tell them this is, and then they say, we don't manage to that. This is like, forget about it. Don't even look at it. Okay, and that's a problem. And that's a problem. In a proper production process, you want to have the best known way to do the work, ergonomically, safety-wise, when it comes to how fast it takes, and also how likely it is that defects will come up. It's a good thing to have it documented, broken down into steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do this, then do this, then do that, and so on. Hopefully with one photo per step, and also a few examples of problems and maybe some tips. Make sure of that, or like, this is really, really important, right? And then this is a basis for training the operators, and hopefully you start to document something, and then you see how to do it, and then you ask them, and then you update the work instruction, because the way they're doing it is better. Then as a process engineer comes and maybe prepares a little fixture or something, and then it's a little bit better, let's update it, right? It's a real system that is alive, and that's really a great way to train the workers. And the same thing for testing stations, for inspectors. You can really define the work of the inspector. Take the product like this, put it like this on the table in front of you, check this, and then turn it around and check it like that. Get your finger to follow the edge to see if there's any problem there, blah, blah, blah. It can be done exactly the same way. This is really all operators kind of work. And by defining exactly and standardizing the way to do it, that's how you reduce variation, which is your enemy. So that is very important, and it does take a lot of attention from the line leader and the workshop supervisors. And it goes back to my point, what was it, number 2, about management. If you have poor management, you're never going to have good quality, basically. If you have good management, then things can fall into place nicely, and if they have the right routines and the right tools, etc., it can really go a very long way. So, yeah, staff training. If you don't ensure the staff is trained, if it's a very new product, new operation, you got to start slowly and give them plenty of attention from someone who can rectify what they're doing, right? That's a very, very important point.
Yeah, and also, I suppose in the case of product inspectors who are coming in, you're going to get a better return on your investment of those inspections as well if they're doing exactly what you need them to be doing, rather than the inspectors are just trying to do their best, but they're sort of it's more ambiguous.
Yeah, right. Now you might want different inspectors to do it in different ways. And some of them trying to, maybe bring a new fresh a pair of eyes and so on, and have several levels, like several lines of defense, basically, right? But the ones that are very close to production, try to standardize the way they work very carefully. And then when you get an escape of some defectives that went through anyway, then you go back. Why was the gap here? Was the standard not followed? Is the standard not adequate? Do we need to evolve the standard, right? But if there's no standard, then you're left trying to think, okay, it's a human mistake. You get into these discussions that do not lead anywhere.
Yeah.
So standards are good for training and for standardizing and minimizing variation.
Okay. And your final tip, number 6?
Well, process control. I mean, if you want to have good quality product, you got to have your processes under control all through the supply chain, basically. And this includes a lot of things. This includes, of course, standards that are defined, operators and inspectors and testers and so on who are trained to follow the standard and so on. When there is equipment involved, it means keeping track of the variables that impact the process. It's not just when there's equipment, it's always the case. You got to know what impacts the result, the output of the process, and you need to keep it under control. If something stupid, if you're doing plastic injection molding, well, your setup is not going to be the same when it's close to freezing versus 40 degrees and 80% of relative humidity. It's going to be very, very different. So how do you adjust things? And then is there a point where you say, well, sorry, it's just too hot? That's not good. We need to find a way to get temperature down. Otherwise, we cannot keep this process under control. It's outside of what they call the process window, right? So you got to be aware of the limitations of your process. And you need to know what variables to look at carefully, right? That's just an example, but there's so many things that impact it. I don't know, when you do powder coating, for example, well, the parts, need to be prepared the right way. They should not have any grease, like people should not touch it with their hands. They should not put it in front of a fan, for example, that would send a lot of dirt. They need to go through the right bath. And how do you control this bath? How do you control, the amount of solids in the bath, the right kinds of solid, etc.? How do you make sure that it's really always under control? And then it goes into powder coating. Okay, so, how cold is the air? What about the paint material? What about the way that the paint, the painter, the paint guy uses his gun, what kind of gun does he use, what angle, what distance, what speed, and so on. The temperature and the time in the oven, the time to cool down, and the temperature after that is, and so on and so forth. There's so many variables. You mess up with one of them, you can have half of your production defective, right? Or 100%. So you need to understand your process and keep it under control. And that can include a lot of things. If there's equipment involved, it definitely includes preventive maintenance to make sure that the piece of equipment, the machine, let's say, operates as it's intended to operate, right? And that maybe some tools and maybe some knives and so on are changed when they should be changed, right? Don't wait until they break and hopefully somebody finds out not too late, right? So that's process control. We could talk about it, and there's a lot of statistical tools around that, of course, but it can be done at a basic level without statistics for a lot of production processes, let's say. And then when you want to break some obstacles, some issues you want to keep going down, you might well have to collect some statistics on some of the characteristics of some of the parts that come out of the process. So that's sort of another topic.
Yeah, we'll do another podcast on that in the future. Definitely, that's great. Well, so that's 6 tips to improve your supplier's quality once you've already started working with them. And in the main, they don't require a huge capital outlay, right?
All of this can be done with no capital outlay.
Yeah.
It's really all about management when you get down to it. Changing the mindset and just good management.
Great. So, that's going to be music to SMEs and entrepreneurs here. So that's good stuff. And so now we're at the end of the episode. That was the 8th in this series of doing your own sourcing from China, of course, relevant to other countries. The links to all the other episodes, if you want to listen to the series, they're in the show notes. And other than that, we'll be back next week. So, Renaud, thanks for stopping by.
Great. Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.